Hey guys, this is Sara Joyce. I'm the number 2 candidate in New South Wales for the Pirate Party.
I'm John August, the lead candidate for the Senate in New South Wales, and I'm also Deputy President of the Pirate Party as well.
Awesome. Looks like we've got the possums joining us out the back here. We're
Yeah.
streaming from the Blue Mountains from my home. I love the mountains. I love living here. I love the community and everything. We wanted to just wait until you guys jump on board and start asking us any questions you like. But we've got a few topics to start with. I just want to pay my respects to the Darug people and pay my respects to elders past and present. All right, so we wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, in recent media, 18C came up and the guys in Queensland talked about this, touched on this a little bit. But we were thinking about how it relates to today to a Bill of Rights, and you sort of need those protections in a Bill of Rights if you're going to get rid of 18C. So, because I mean, I think the idea behind it is that 18C is it's sort of, it's a little bit stronger than we'd like it to be. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I think that, I mean, 18C in isolation, I guess it's Pirate Party policy that, we do want freedom of speech, but the way that we relate to it, and I think the way that the Liberal Party or the mainstream media relates to it is a bit different. We don't want to, basically give license to obnoxious shock jocks and, obnoxious media commentators. It's sort of like basically the way the Liberal Party wants to do things is free up free speech so the privileged, obnoxious people can mouth off. But, they want to avoid scrutiny of government. They want to stop whistleblowers from talking about government. And I suppose it's going a few steps away from that, but we're into like transparency of government contracts and that sort of thing. So, yes, we're talking about having more free speech, but we're also talking about lifting up everybody, because the way the government relates to these rights, it's sort of rights that really only the privileged or wealthy can take advantage of. While we'd like to think that everybody is lifted up, and into the bargain there's free speech as well. And so I think we relate to it in a rather different way to the government. And when they talk about repealing 18C, it's basically to help their mates.
Yeah. So I mean, like, what we want to do is we want to create a Bill of Rights which protects people's rights more universally and gives our constitution more teeth. And currently we don't have freedom of speech in the country.
Yeah, right.
We've got certain rights, but do you want to expand a little bit on that as well?
Well, I think the only really right to communication we have is related to elections, because there's free and fair elections. So in order for there to be free and fair elections, you have to have speech related to elections. And that's, I think, the only thing that the Constitution or the High Court has really said that we have in the way of a right to speak out. I think, more or less, we probably have the prerogative to speak out, and it's a matter of whether the government wants to stop us. But we don't have this strong right to speak out except when it comes to elections. But even with elections, there's all these regulatory hurdles, like, the candidate registration, the fact that there's no group voting tickets, and there's a lot of problems there in terms of the way elections are run. But yeah, that's our freedom of speech is very limited in Australia.
It is. So if you've got any questions at all you want to ask, just pop them into the chat, and we'll try and answer them as we go. So we've sort of covered Bill of Rights a bit, I think, enough, and the guys in Queensland have spoken about 18C quite extensively. Something that's come up in the media quite recently, and I'm talking about the mainstream media who tend to ignore the Pirate Party for some reason. I don't know why. We're running in 4 states. This is our 3rd election.
Well, I think we've got a legitimate grievance, but I think the mainstream media is very selective in a lot of ways. And we're not the only people or group or cause or whatever that's frustrated with the mainstream media. I suppose I will just say, as a bit of a tangent, don't want to oversell this, that the Pirate Party's got secular policies, very good ones. And I'll give a nod to the secular party in Victoria. But the thing is, I'm involved with the New South Wales Humanists, in what you might call the broader New South Wales Humanists. We have never had a letter to the editor in the Sydney Morning Herald published. Now,
Wow.
is that trying to say that we're such lousy letter writers we've never had one published? We do scratch our heads on that, and like that's the experience that we've had. Yeah, so I think a lot of causes are very frustrated with how the mainstream media relates to them. I suppose I'm going off on a bit of a tangent, but there's light pollution. That's one of my other causes, and to get mainstream media traction on that is quite hard. But you have prominent astronomers at the Sydney Observatory who sometimes get a bit of traction. That's good. But broadly speaking, it's very hard for the rest of us to get the mainstream media to pay attention. So not just the Pirate Party, but the mainstream media is very selective. Maybe they're lazy. Maybe they just want to talk to people.
I don't think they're lazy. I think they
status.
have a certain amount of column space to fill, and they tend to fill it with Greens, Labor, or Liberal. And anybody who sort of speaks out is extreme right and says something crazy. And we tend not to say crazy things because we're a left-wing progressive party, and we try to, actually do good things for the country, as opposed to sort of standing on a pedestal and saying, hey, we're going to save you all.
No.
It's like we know there's a process involved. Anyway, so bringing it back to the international politics, it's been something that's been discussed lately in the media, saying nobody's talking about international politics. Well, we've been talking about international politics.
We've been talking about it for ages. We've had policies saying, look, we should have a more independent policy. And what do they mean, nobody? I mean, I guess I'll give a plug to the Iron Fist Velvet Club podcast out of Brisbane that interviewed me recently. But they've been talking about they've been talking about foreign policy and what submarines we should buy and a whole lot of other things. And how can the mainstream media say nobody's been talking about it? Maybe they mean nobody we can be bothered talking to us talking about it. Maybe that's what they mean. Yeah?
I mean, one of the causes I've been following as well has been the self-determination of the West Papuans, and the way that Australia's been complicit in the crimes of Indonesia, where we haven't spoken up and supported the people of West Papua, where in 1962 they were given their freedom, and in 1963 they were annexed by Indonesia, and they've fought against them ever since. It's kind of like having Israel and Palestine on your doorstep, which is a reference that's been made by many people the protest movement.
I would say that there's a definite duplicity about foreign policy, whether you want to talk about Australia, the US, or the West at large, that we basically roll out the red carpet for people who are oppressed by our enemies. But if they're oppressed by our friends, we couldn't give a toss. And if they're oppressed by people who are just really not important players, then we don't give a toss either. Like there was a time when I have no love for the former Soviet Union. They were shipping people off to gulags, they were assassinating them, and when they weren't doing either of them, they were locking up political dissidents in lunatic asylums. So, I have no love for the former Soviet Union. And when you had refugees from the former Soviet Union, be it Australia or the US or whatever, we'd roll out the red carpet for them. But when it was refugees from other countries which were doing horrible, atrocious things, and they were seeking refuge from Australia, we just sort of just sort of shrugged our shoulders, and it wasn't really important. So what it was, we weren't reacting to oppression or injustice as such. We only worried about oppression or injustice that came from our enemies, and that was a selectivity in our foreign policy back then. And I think more recently it goes back to the time of Howard, where I think there were refugees coming from Iraq, and Howard was basically sending them back. Wow. And then half a year later, we attacked Iraq because the US wanted us to. That's
as part of the coalition of the willing.
As part of the coalition of the willing. Anyway, you want to say something there, Sara?
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, you can relate it exactly to Menace and have been, stayed away there as part of a, let's not deal with the problem, let's just give it to somebody else. We're very much for releasing the people from Manus Nauru and getting them over here and, treating them like human beings, which is just deserved after everything they've gone through. And then from that as well, I think, we've got to remember that it was actually the Labor government who created those who opened Manus Nauru, wasn't it? And then it kept, for the last 6 years, it's been, made worse by the Liberal Party. But I guess, there's a lot of blame to throw around. But what happened at the end of last year was the whole Manus and Nauru issue was going to come up, and they sacrificed a rather important bill to us called the Access and Assistance Bill, where you had about, I think, 15,000 signatories of, and hundreds of letters and input to change elements of the bill, and nothing was done, and Labor and the Greens just rushed it through Parliament so they could get to the Manus and Nauru issue, which they couldn't get to because the Liberal Party had pissed off early, and they left work early, as they tend to do whenever they don't want to do the work. Very much like Clive Palmer, who only showed up for 7.5% of the time, I think, in the Senate. So, yeah, I mean, Access and Assistance Bill obviously is very important to us, and it should be important to every Australian, because it means that our privacy is basically being thrown out the window. And
that is one of the things the government has done a lot of, is violate our privacy.
Our digital and civil rights. Yeah.
So we do have a question there.
Oh, we do? Okay. Do you know anything about left market anarchism?
Oh, goodness me.
That's a question for Simon Frew, the former president of the Pirate Party, I think.
Yes, unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. Well, let's say I can.
Still loves it.
Yes, he's still. No, we met him the other day. He's still jovial and doing his activism and so on. But anyway, let me try to. The short answer is I really don't know the definition of left market anarchism. I guess we could look into that, but I can say a few things.
Well, Mark, if you want to give us a chance to explain a little bit more about left market anarchism, we can put in a response. But yeah, not familiar with the term.
Well, I'll say one of the broad brush summaries I'll make about the Pirate Party is we're concerned about both corporate power and government intrusion into what we're up to. So, I suppose there's a certain degree where we do sort of say that the market is good, initiatives are good, but there's so much abuse, there's so much rent seeking, that's part of the problem. But in a broad sense, we're not trying to let government off the hook, nor are we willing to let corporations off the hook, because I guess there's some political parties who would, worship the free market and business and say that they will lead us to prosperity. And government's just got to get out of the way, or there's people who'll say that business is really bad and we just got to leave stuff to government, not worrying about how government can mess up our lives as well. But I suppose the general sentiment with the Pirate Party is we're worried about both sides of the coin, and we are worried about corporate power. But as far as left market anarchism goes, I can only guess that if you're talking about boycotts and things like that, certainly the Pirate Party endorses individual free will, and if people want to participate in boycotts to make a point, it's a very good thing, and that's a reflection of people's identity and what how they want to change the world. But I can't say anything more without actually knowing what left market anarchism means.
Mark, if you do want to pop something in there for us, we'll definitely respond. So another thing that's sort of really important to us and should be important to every Australian is transparency of government, and we haven't had a lot of that. We've had some good media going out there and putting in freedom of information requests, and they don't always succeed. So it's something that's I mean, for those who are engaged in politics, it's very important that we sort of understand what our government's doing, and we keep being surprised by all these things that are happening. Like, for example, there was the Liberal politician who had a mate in China or something that he gave water deals to.
Yeah, well, I'm not impressed with the way China is influencing politics in Australia, but equally we're letting the US off the hook because the US is an ally, and I think that if we're going to be critical of China having undue influence, we should also be a bit concerned about America having undue influence, but I think we treat them differently because they're an ally.
Can I just jump in there? Mark Freed asked the question, which of these do you agree with? Abolishment of intellectual property, drug legislation, ending taxation, firearm legislation, open borders? So I guess we can break those apart one by one.
And there's also, is intellectual property and talking about electronic and physical. So that's, goodness me. Well, anyway, so do you want to start on that, Sara, or do you want to...
Abolishment of intellectual property. Well, not entirely, no.
Well, the thing is, we are talking about seriously changing the laws about intellectual property but not getting rid of it. But let's
We
say,
want to support, if say there was an artist that wanted to created some work, we want to support that artist. We want to support the creator of the work. We don't want to support the corporation 150 years after their death,
yes,
you know, who takes their creation and then makes a mozza out of it. You know, like you've got that good story about Mickey Mouse.
Oh yes, well the copyright has been increased to death of the author plus 70 years, and that was due to lobbying from Disney to keep Mickey Mouse in copyright, and to some degree to keep that intellectual property in the US as compared to the rest of the world. So that's a hideous abuse of intellectual property. But anyway, Sarah, look, I'll start on a bit of a rant, and stop me if I go too far. But
well, if I can ask you a question,
yeah,
then, just before you do. So, as far as the party's stance on on what we actually want copyright to look like,
yes,
in terms of the individual.
Yes.
So how, like, it's
I believe
15 years of the artist?
15 years after the date of creation. Because to fill that in, to say, you know, is intellectual property property? Now, one of the things you might say is even land, I suppose, is a bit dodgy if you look at it with a microscope. But I think we make the pragmatic call that we go down that Georgist land value taxation path to try to say, well, look, people can have these licenses to that plot of land, but at least we've got land value taxation to try to balance things out. So we don't abolish private property, but we do, I guess, engage with it in a particular way. So that's that one. And then if you want to talk about intellectual property and copyright, I mean, that's even more dubious as far as ownership of a right to things. So we don't, well, if I'm channeling the party correctly, or it's my view, I don't know, but certainly I don't believe that people have the right to intellectual property in the way that they might think. What intellectual property? It's a recognition, it's a deal made between the individual and society to give those individuals an incentive to put stuff out there. Now, they make a bit of money along the way, and that's a deal made between society and them. So in a sense, when you grant copyright, it's not granting something that person had, you know, it's not recognising an underlying right of ownership. It's more a pragmatic deal that society makes in order to facilitate, you know, the flow and generation of worthwhile content.
And bring it. So I think we've covered that fairly well.
Yeah.
The next one from Mark Freed was legislation, and I might want to talk a little bit about this one.
Okay, yeah, I'll let you do that. So.
We're all for cannabis reform. We're all for decriminalising cannabis use and the sale of cannabis. You know, that's sort of the starting point, I think, in drug reform, and then you want to move on to the control of other substances in terms of, you know, how severe they are, or, you know, the benefit versus.
Well, we are talking about, look, making a more genuine system to drugs and how much harm they would cause. But fundamentally, I think it's you try to set things up so people are doing informed consent and taking control of their lives, and not, you know, stopping them in a paternalistic sort of way. But certainly, we do want to say, well, maybe drugs, you know, maybe drugs are dangerous. And to the extent that they're dangerous, well, we should have pill testing. We should have we should enable people to sort of understand what they're doing to themselves rather than stopping them from taking those steps. And that's that. First off, legalizing cannabis, I think, is basically just a clear thing. At least decriminalisation, if not total legalization. So that
we definitely want to see it. It happens straight away after the election.
And the other drugs, like I will make the general broad brush sentiment that there's a lot of hypocrisy. Like alcohol causes a lot of harm in society, and that's just accepted. At the same time, it gets convoluted that the harmful effects of alcohol are used as an excuse to shut down the city and have lockout laws and that sort of thing, which I think is going a bit extreme. But, you know, there is this issue that, like, here's alcohol, which has these effects, and other drugs which do not have the effects of alcohol, and yet there's all this, you know, run in circles and screaming and shouting over them. So, yeah, that's
something we can. That's something we've got as a policy that we've talked about. I laughed when Richard Di Natale got up and said we're the only party with a drug party. All they're focused on.
Yeah. I mean, we recognise the hemp party. I mean, good luck to them. You know, they're also micro party, and good luck to them. You know,
I mean,
wish them well, but please vote for us first. Yeah.
You know, we support a lot of the other left-wing progressive parties as well, like the Science Party and affordable housing as well.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
getting
right.
back onto the track about the drug reform, we do have a policy on it, and it's something that we're going to look at expanding as well. So if I just want to move on to the next one about ending taxation.
Okay, well, let's say we don't end taxation, but what we do is we have a reverse taxation system where tax and welfare are integrated, and you effectively have a universal basic income. It's a little bit more complicated than that.
Can I start from a general question I've had? Is, you know, when World War I started, is when we started having income tax, and we just built tax upon that. And the promise, I believe, was that those taxes would go away after the war was finished, but that never happened. Right? And we built up those taxes. What do you say to the people who just want to abolish tax altogether?
I guess I think that it depends on who you talk to. My temperature measurement is that most people are not resentful about paying tax in the way the Liberal Party imagines them to be, but they certainly are worried about value for money and the tax not being wasted.
Yeah,
and that's perhaps a legitimate concern. Social
programs that you know, education and health are two of the most important things I feel that our taxes should be going into. And something I've done is travel around the state, interviewing parents, teachers, and politicians in the past during the Gonski campaign when I was working with Gillard and Rudd, trying to raise the $14.5 billion for education. It never happened. And the Liberal Party has just gutted education, and they're trying to give it to Catholic schools and private schools.
Well, one of the things we do talk about doing is getting rid of the private-public distinction and basically pushing all schools into the public domain. That is one of our policy elements.
Definitely. And I mean, you know, it's never made any sense to me as to why we put our taxes into private schools or religious schools. We're supposed to be a secular nation.
Well, I've always thought that if people want to take their children to those sorts of schools outside of
pay for it.
They should pay for it themselves.
Absolutely.
And not get government subsidies. It's their choice. They should basically put their money where their mouth is. Because the thing is, as government sort of puts more and more subsidies to private schools, they don't make their places more affordable. They just spend more on facilities or whatever. They don't increase the supply when the government gives them more money. They just sort of glomp them. That's the end of that bit of money.
Yeah, well, that's something that's never made sense to me. So the next one was firearm legislation. Well, I'll talk a little bit about this because when I started my campaign, I was talking to a lot of shooters. I got a lot of blowback. How's that for a pun? I actually said that, well, I grew up shooting. I learned how to shoot from a young age and I enjoyed it. It's something that I want to pursue later on. I haven't been shooting recently, but I had been talking to the shooters because I wanted to understand their point of view and I wanted to understand why they wanted any kind of reform. And I think that, again, the Queensland guys have sort of covered this. We are happy with the laws because we don't have significant mass shootings all the time. But if I could just make this one point, is that there is one thing that I would be willing to concede on, and that is the issue of, and this is not necessarily in our party policy, but the issue of suppressors. And I've spoken to a number of people who say that, you know, suppressors are a safety device. They're not, hi Gavin, they're a safety device. They're not like you see in the movies. They're not like a silencer. They're there to protect your ears, essentially, and that's something that we want to, that I want to look at pursuing over the years and see how we can, you know, look at modifying that legislation a little bit, you know. But that's as far as I'm willing to go in terms of gun legislation, because I think everything else is.
Well, if you want to check out policies, there is some sort of national agreement on firearms we endorse, and along the way, implicit we are endorsing. The legitimate right of people to own firearms for recreation and that sort of thing. So we do actually endorse that. And
just don't shoot anybody.
Yes,
it's a really bad thing to do. Don't shoot anyone. It's I grew up with gun safety, and I worry actually because there's so many kids that haven't grown up with that kind of level of safety. I think in the 80s and the 70s it was sort of the thing. I was in cadets. I used to, deal with firearms all the time. But it's just, if you don't have that level of safety, I think when you're younger, or you don't have serious training.
Well, maybe there's
and somebody puts a gun in your hand.
One of the things that the way the current legislation is, and maybe it's a good thing for what it's worth, but you basically do need to be a member of a recognised gun club to actually have a shooter's licence. And maybe that's good and maybe that's bad, but you can certainly see a certain, it's sort of doing what you're talking about doing. Ideally, in that case, you are helping people with gun safety and putting gun owners in a community that they can sort of, bounce ideas off and that sort of thing, which I think is a positive thing. So, and then the last one, I guess, is open borders. So I would have to say I don't think the Pirate Party has sort of a policy sort of saying that we should have open borders, but I will say in its defence, we do say, look, we should increase our foreign aid to the UN recommended level. So in a sense, if you want to say we are a nation that has an obligation to the rest of the world to make some contribution, we do at least endorse that particular UN initiative so that we're not just building a fence and saying, ha, 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 we're all right.
A rabbit-proof fence.
Yeah, rabbit-proof fence. We're not just, sitting behind our fence and saying, you guys can get stuff.
Well, especially, I think we need to start investing more in our region because the problem with climate change is we're going to see, this is what it's like every Friday in the mountains, guys. Lots of noise. So there's panthers right down the track as well. So there's, with the rising seas and climate change, we're gonna have to address it. There's no choice. We're either going to have a certain level of humanity or we're not. And I would prefer if Australians had a certain level of accountability and humanity and supported the nations that are around us, and if we need to bring in the refugees. And I think we need to take some responsibility, for human life in our region, especially. So
there's some questions from Mark again and Will Lotto. I wonder if we should continue with Mark or jump to Will.
Let's jump to Will. So if elected, what would the Pirate Party do about the mess the LNP made of the NBN? Oh, we've got lots of stories about that. So
I suppose we'll go to the... You want to talk about that?
Yeah, well,
policy?
I've dealt a lot with the NBN because I've worked in IT and I've worked in council. They've dug out the front of my house and we can't even get NBN yet. So I'm really pissed off about the whole thing. But the speeds that people are getting, 100 megabytes per second, if you get that. That's the kind of speed I was getting when I was living in Tokyo in 2007, or in Japan in 2007, and it was. It just blows my mind that we're so far behind, and it does stop businesses coming to Australia. It does make them think twice, and it does stop. It doesn't stop creativity, but it does hamper it somewhat.
Well, do we want to actually check out the policy and read out the relevant lines there?
Oh, okay. Yep. So our Pirate Party policy.
So let's have a look here.
So we get to the NBN. What I guess I want to address
support for fibre to the premises infrastructure projects.
Yep.
Okay. What do we got here? The current copper network is not sufficient to meet the requirements of a growing digital society. Fibre to the premises infrastructure project that connects the majority of Australians to a fibre network, where economically feasible, is fundamental to the creation of a vibrant digital society in Australia.
Are you guys getting that? You read that a bit fast.
All right. Well, maybe you want to read it out as well.
Okay. Which part was it?
That one there.
Yeah. Okay. So the current copper network is not sufficient to meet the requirements of a growing digital society. A fibre to the premises infrastructure project that connects the majority of Australians to fibre network, where economically feasible, is fundamental to the creation of a vibrant digital society in Australia. So basically, in the next couple of years, we need to rip out the copper network and put the fibre network in so that the bloody thing works fast. So
yeah, I'd say that would be the consequence of our policy. So,
yeah. So I mean, and I got the feeling from Labor that they were going to do that as well. But you never know. I mean, they're going to have so many problems because. The Liberal Party has done everything they possibly can to make it worse for the Labor Party coming in. And we're pretty solid in our thinking that the Labor Party is going to win this election. So, but regardless of who you vote for, you need people who are going to, hold these people to account. And there's a lot of things we're not happy with the Labor Party. There's a lot of things we're not happy with the Greens.
Well, I suppose just talking a little bit about transparency, we're very much against these opaque financial structures. I mean, I've got mixed feelings about privatisation in the first place, and I think Rod Sims was basically saying that he believes in privatisation, but the Liberal Party aren't smart enough to pull it off. Okay, that's paraphrasing what Rod Sims has said. So we're not 100% against privatisation either, but I would say if government has some sort of opaque financial arrangement with a corporation and then hides behind commercial in confidence, that's in our policies. That's just plain wrong. If you do business with the government, you've got to accept that everything is going to be in the open, everything's got to be transparent, and that's an initiative there. So, going off on a bit of tangent there.
No, that's all right. I mean, there's that movie that is about transparency. It's got Tom Hanks in it. It's a movie that sort of explores this area. What if you were transparent with everything, and the detriment of that, and the people at the top sort of weren't transparent. Sorry, spoilers. But once it became transparent for them at the top, the whole thing crumbled. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a process that we've used in the party for years, for a decade now, is to try and be when we're dealing, and that's why our policies are online, and that's why we have the most amount of policies of any party online fleshed out for people to see. And that's why other parties tend to look at our page and go, okay, so how can we modify this to fit in with
I would say we're having a bit of a go at the Greens for saying, look,
we do like them.
Well, they're the only party that. Sorry, do you want to say something?
No. Sorry, finish that.
Okay, so we're all sort of saying, look, they were saying that the Greens are the only party that is into legalisation of cannabis. When like the hemp party, I mean, that's front and centre. I mean, it's part of our policies, but I will recognise for the hemp party, I mean, help in marijuana prohibition. That's what the whole thing is. But the other thing is the Greens used to whinge about Labor stealing their policies, and I think it's sort of a very, very interesting thing to say because, mate. They steal our policies. They
do. I mean, they've talked to us about it. Even some people in Labor have talked to us about we love your policies, and they go in and they look at them and they, make recommendations. And I don't think they steal them word for word, but they do.
Yeah, well,
use us as
I will sing the praises of the Pirate Party, but basically our policy set is pretty coherent philosophically and intellectually. And obviously, if you cherry pick bits of our policy in a populist way, well, it's not the Pirate Party anymore. It's a grab bag of policies for just pragmatic reasons. So I will underline that. I mean, I will be proud of our policy in the way that we sort of put things together. But maybe we want to go to another question, I suppose, or another comment.
So we've got Mark again. Everything you hate about the state would likely. This is more a statement. Okay, and then the second one, two reverse papers have discredited any statistical significance of firearm laws reducing gun homicides. Okay.
Well, I think I did emphasise.
Well, if there is a question in there.
Well, there's also the first one there that I think was sort of skipped along the way. Well, I might read that one.
Which one was that?
Here we are. I believe there are enough ways in the market to profit from Labor without protection from the government. Music is basically...
It's not really a question, it's more of a statement.
Yeah.
It's something, like, people can read a statement, that's fine.
All right. Well, I would still say the universal basic income, the point of the universal basic income is once one's got a certain amount of money, regardless, their negotiating position to go into the workplace and get money out of an employer is they're much stronger because the employer has to say, well, I'm going to pay you enough that you're better off than you currently are. And that's going to improve everyone's negotiating position without the need for all these minimum wage laws and whatnot and so on. Not that I'm saying we should get rid of the minimum wage laws, but it could be a downstream thing that happens. But certainly, people are going to be in a much better negotiating position when they're looking at working.
Okay, so does anybody have any more questions that they want to ask of us? Whether you have any questions about our campaigns or what we personally believe versus what our party believes, or I guess one of the things we can talk about is why we got into the Pirate Party in the first place. Yes, that's right, yeah. Well, I joined back in April 2014. I was spending a few years there working for the Teachers Federation on the Gonski campaign, and I ended up working with two Prime Ministers, Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, and Peter Garrett. My mum was very happy about that, and just helping them to shape the message of the Gonski campaign. And obviously, it was so disappointing when Tony Abbott got elected, because we then basically all of our work went down the drain, and the feeling I think at the Teachers Federation at the time was we lost, and it was so disappointing. And then we started this 6-year period of just gutting education, gutting First Peoples programs, gutting health, you know. And there's been, I think, so many protests in this last 6 years. It's just been crazy. And then of course we've had Manus and Nauru. And
well, I have to say, I do tend to think that it's very good to have protests, but you've got to somehow push that into a majority feeling in the electorate that will actually change the way things are. And I guess that's the missing ingredient.
Well, I think you know, the HSU had some success there, but of course then they had scandals, and there was the attack on unions by Tony Abbott. And I mean, I didn't have a good experience leaving my union, the union I was working for, and I definitely saw there was some duplicity in the way that unions are run. But at the same time, you know, they're basically organisations to help people.
Well, the other thing is that you know, I suppose feeding on this whole unions thing, there was the Liberal government who was saying, look at how scrutinised corporations are, and unions are not scrutinised. But you've got to remember, corporations do actually have what's called limited liability, and that's quite a privilege that society has granted them. And in exchange for that, it's very appropriate that they be scrutinised carefully from an accounting point of view. Now, obviously, if unions are committing fraud, that's a bad thing, but it's not quite the same deal. What the unions are doing is representing the needs of the members, and hopefully the members should be able to flex their muscles to ensure that.
Hope that the unions are representing the needs of the members.
The point is, the unions are not granted a privilege in the way that corporations are granted the privilege of limited liability. So they're a rather different beast, and I think some people make that distinction, I should say, but you know, it seemed to be lost on the government at the time. But,
another topic I sort of want to talk about.
Well, maybe I should talk about.
You still want to go on?
Well, why I got into the Pirate Party.
Yes.
Do you want me to talk about that? Sorry. So a few things there. You can see I was talking about intellectual property, and for me, that sort of stuff about Disney, the way corporations abuse their trademarks. You know, another story about Hollywood, you know, the old story that no Hollywood movie has ever made a profit, while at the same time, you know, they resent people copying their films. And maybe they've got a bit of a point with the whole film thing, but it's like they don't go to the issue with clean hands. They point a finger at others, while ethically they're really dubious themselves in terms of the silly bugger games that they play with the accounting of movies. And so there's just this whole lot of hypocrisy around intellectual property, or that, you know, firms have this swag of patents that they don't have sitting on the shelves defensively and they don't actually use. And then you've got your patent trolls. So that whole set of things, you know, what I consider to be the hypocrisy around intellectual property, which is basically corporate interests overreaching, you know, that was a certain source of concern. A
driving force for you to get into this party.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'd say is a little bit incidental. You know, I was talking about, I guess, being concerned about corporations and being concerned about government, because I think there are, at least coming from the right or coming from the Liberal Party, there's this apologist argument about corporations and the market, which sort of misses the point, because I believe in the market in some ways, but it's so easily abused. And I guess I thought that the Pirate Party, you know, we believe in private initiative, but we don't like rent seeking. You know, we believe in privatisation in some areas, but not others. We recognise natural monopolies, and it just seems like the major political parties are just so such a dog's breakfast of ideas when it comes to relating to the market and privatisation and those sorts of issues. And the Pirate Party approached it with such clarity, and I did quite like that. So those I guess are the two things that attracted me to the Pirate Party.
You were in the Secular Party before
That's
you came
correct,
into the Pirate Party.
So,
and this is, how many elections have you run in now? This is the third federal?
Well, with the Pirate Party, Party. It's
second with the Pirate Party.
Second with the Pirate Party. That's
Yeah.
right. We almost stood for the by-election in Bennelong, but
Right.
but decided the better of it thought was to save our resources for this election. Really, was I guess what it fell down to.
Yeah, and I think we've run a hard campaign. Not trying to pat ourselves on the back too much, but we've really run in 4 states, in WA, Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. We've had 2 candidates in each state, and I think we've done a lot of great work. But we've just got a question from Peter Lawson here. I'll read out his statement and then question.
Okay.
It's ridiculous that more federal funding goes to private schools than public. I think this needs to be reversed. But is there a need for private schools to get any federal funding? Well, I think in emergency circumstances, maybe, that I think that's completely valid if there's an emergency and they need extra funding to keep going, or if there's something, I can't imagine what kind of issue there would be. But generally, I feel that only public schools should get government funding. Taxpayers pay for government schools. They should not be paying for private schools, charter schools, or religious schools. It just makes no sense to me or any other person who is in the public education system as to why they get that funding at all. So, I mean, I know that politicians in the past have had trouble saying that out loud, because it is a controversial issue for a lot of politicians, because a lot of the politicians have children in private schools.
Well, we have a very strong policy that's pushing back against private schools and saying that there really should only be public schools and we should buy back the private schools. That's sort of built into our policy framework.
The other thing is the funding in education. With the 2/3 of funding that goes into these charter and private schools and religious schools, that funding would easily fix up a lot of the problems in the public sector.
Well, I think if you actually had the idea that I mean, not that this is particularly Pirate Party funding at the moment, but I suppose a bit of a stopgap measure would be to say, look, what is the authentic amount that a given private school's student is saving the government in terms of their expenditure, and maybe split the difference and give half of that to the private school or something like that. That might be.
I don't want to give them any.
Well, you don't want to give them any. This is the thing about whether you want to say, look, it's a personal choice, and if people make that choice, they should financially support themselves independently in that. Which is one.
Well, we've got to give it to the government. It only makes sense to me, and I know all the teachers in New South Wales agree with me.
Well, certainly our policy is very strongly against private schools. I have to say that. That's certainly the case.
I mean, I guess, if you want to send your kids to a private school, that's your choice. But I think the more you invest in the public sector, the better the education will be.
The other thing to keep in mind, this is if you go into the deep dark depths of history in Geelong, where it was Goulburn perhaps. Goulburn.
Deep dark depths.
Deep dark depths
of history. Goulburn.
Well, back in Goulburn, there were some Catholic schools that basically went on strike and kicked all their school kids out, and they had to go to the public school system, which was quite overwhelmed at the time. And it was, in a sense, one of those negotiating things of the unions going on strike and cutting off the oil refinery or equivalent. And Menzies eventually succumbed and put through some money. But that was a complicated situation, because what happened was, it was a sudden thing where the government put in regulation obliging schools to have certain levels of infrastructure and toilet and this and that and the other. And then they didn't actually give those private schools the money to support the obligations that they were putting on them. And so there was a somewhat more complicated situation. And certainly if you take all those school students and just chuck them into the public school system, suddenly it ain't going to cope. So you do want to have some sort of transition program. But certainly that's my understanding way back in Menzies' time of the thing that the pressure that was applied that meant that the government was, from that point on, obliged to put money into private schools. But I do think it was a bit problematic at the time that the government put imposts onto private schools, but then didn't give them money to follow through on it. And I think that's a lot of government policy, sad to say, all over. There's a lot of things like that. One old classic thing is that the state government puts imposts onto local government to do certain things, and then the local government has to increase the rates and, basically, have extra, parking attendants enforcing the fines more vigorously and that sort of thing. And basically the scorn gets heaped on the council and not the state government, which is actually the cause of these things. So that sort of thing happens a lot, really.
That actually brings up a really good point. So I've worked with council, and I've seen how the way that council's control over their local area has been taken away by the state government. And I mean, there's several things up here in the Blue Mountains that people are not happy with. There's community groups about the Malgoa Road trees, like 200 to 400-year-old trees that are going to get cut down for a new highway. There's the airport. Obviously, that's a big issue for people in the area. And then there's the Warragamba Dam, and the Warragamba Dam is something that is something that I would like not to see, sort of made taller, even though we are running out of water in the Warragamba Dam. I'd like to see slightly more expensive alternatives worked on. And the thing is, both Blue Mountains and Penrith City Council have stated their objection to the state government's increasing of the wall size. So, there's not much they can do because it's run by the state and federal government.
There was this Windsor Bridge, that's something that this is
the $2 million for the, that's the North Richmond Bridge.
What I call the Windsor Bridge, with some independent engineers who said, look, you don't need to rip down the old one and replace it the way you are and sort of basically make a dog's breakfast of all the heritage in that part of the world. And one of the things that the people, I believe I got the right town, Windsor, that basically that's got some very historic stuff, because all the stuff in Sydney was basically bulldozed and covered over, but the stuff in that part of the world is still, pristine from that time in history. So they have quite a monopoly on history, and the Roads and Maritime Service was sort of going in and ripping it up to put this bridge in, and other people saying, look, you don't need that bridge, and again giving them the Greens a bit of credit. Maureen Faruqi was sort of making analysis of that and saying, look, this is dodgy, and there's so many dodginess there. But what I will mention is what we're getting to 7:47. We will shut this down at 8 o'clock. So just prompting people, if you want to ask a flurry of questions.
Yeah, we've got another 14 minutes or so to go. So ask your questions. We've got one from Peter Lawson. I'll just jump in there. So, so do you think it's reasonable for churches to remain tax exempt if they're willing to open their books to prove that they're using their money for charitable purposes? Well, interesting question, Peter. I believe that. I believe that we shouldn't be making churches or religious organisations tax exempt, as well as not-for-profits, which I think should have like a cap. So if they're making $2 million in profit, then anything above that they shouldn't be getting tax benefits from. That's just my point of view.
What's our policy on this one? I mean, I can make my own personal comments on that.
We are for a secular society.
Yeah, Well, look up that policy, but I will say in the meantime that what you're talking about there is not the church getting tax exempt status because they're a church, but basically tax exempt status in the things that they do. So in a sense, they're behaving just like...
If they open their books.
Yes, if they open their books and they're behaving just like a secular charity, right, then they should be given the tax privileges of a secular charity because they're doing secular charity work.
Then they're being accountable.
Then they're being accountable,
to the
and
public,
then in a sense, they're doing exactly the same thing as a secular charity would do. They've just got a church single on it. It's sort of like, look, we're doing this charitable work, and we've basically, got the I don't know, the flag of a safety pin or something like that. Flying, and so we're still a secular charity sort of thing. So that's the way I would answer that question. In other words, if a church does secular charitable works, they should be granted the same tax status as anybody who does a secular charitable work, but they don't get tax-free status because they're a church.
Well, that's a good answer, I think. And I think that was a great question actually, because that's something I hadn't personally thought of before. I suppose if churches are being accountable to the public, then
but the point is,
if they're doing charity work,
the point is that they would get tax-free status because of what they're doing and the secular works they're doing, just like any others. Anyway, I'm repeating myself.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Christy Louise is saying good luck for tomorrow, and John O'Hare.
Thank you, Christy.
And John O'Hare.
Hi, John. My FDN MBN connection is 4 meg. I have faster on ADSL. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that before. We would like to see it replaced with the fibre network, and it's probably going to happen anyway in the next couple of years if there's the money there to do it, I suppose.
Well, one of the things is it's easy to have a wish list. It's quite another thing to actually have the money and implement it. And I recognise that is a challenge. And I don't believe we have so much a wish list. I think we have a lot of financial astuteness to our package, and say our universal basic income, our integrated welfare and taxation system. I do believe that has been well costed. And one of the problems with it is, if you want to say it's a problem, it's still an improvement on our current situation in that you are getting the equivalent of the dole without having to jump through any administrative hoops. You don't have to prove that you're looking for work. You just get it. Okay, so that's an improvement.
Yeah,
but some people are also saying, well, hang on, it's still not enough to live on. And I suppose my answer is, look, we can't solve all problems at once. What we've done is make a properly costed policy. Because if we didn't make a properly costed policy, people would start chalking rocks saying, oh, where are you going to get the money for that? And that's the first thing that happens when you have a policy idea, is people say, oh, where are you going to get the money for it? So, we've got to be mindful of that constraint, I suppose.
Okay, so we're coming into the last 10 minutes of our talk here, and I really appreciate you guys sticking with us. It's been fantastic so far. And there's been some amazing questions. Let's, if you've got any questions, see if you can ask them in the next few minutes.
Yes.
There are a couple of points I do want to touch on before
I will say we do have our various public Facebook sites you can ask questions for, and I guess we'll probably be checking them overnight. But realistically, once 8 a.m. or 8:30 kicks in, we'll be busy tomorrow. So
I'll be up at 3. Probably,
keep that in mind. Yeah.
So your Facebook page is John August Pirate Party Australia. Is that the one?
John August Senate candidate or something. Gosh, goodness me.
We'll look it up.
I mean, I can look it up if you like, or you can look it up.
Mine is Sara Joyce for Senate on Facebook. If you haven't liked it already.
Yeah.
So, and we'll put them in the comments anyway. So there's a couple of more things I want to talk about, and one of the main themes of this election has been climate change, and the Greens purport to be at the forefront of supporting climate change.
Well, people have been chucking rocks at us over our climate policy, and I cannot say the perfect is the enemy of the good. That's all I can say.
So I mean, it's something we're looking at improving, obviously, in terms of our policy online. But I'm very much for climate action, very much for taking care of our environment. When we're expanding out into regional areas in particular, we need to have the infrastructure for them to support the people that are out there, and that currently it's being exhausted. Like water systems in New South Wales are devastated at the moment. But also to keep in consideration everything from animal species to, how much water is being used, to Aboriginal sites, to just we need to scrutinise everything.
We do talk about a biodiversity matrix.
We do have a policy on that.
Yes, a lot of good things we have in our policy, and people say, "Oh, but you don't have a policy on this." Or,
So I'm just going to post our policy platform as well. Here for you guys, just so that you've got that for reference. Okay. Just posting that in there now.
Very good.
So yeah, if you want to look at our policies and platform, it's right there for you. So climate change, I think, has spurred about 750,000 young people to sign up for this election, which is just phenomenal, and I'm so proud of the kids for getting in there. And
I run a community radio station. If I can butt in, some of the comments that I've been making is, I think the mainstream political parties, if people are voting for them for stupid or superficial reasons, they don't mind. They just say, oh, well, that's fair enough. They're voting for us, aren't they? But if people vote against them for their own reasons, they'll try to delegitimise them. Oh, they're young people who don't know what the world really means, and they're just grabbing hold of this trend or whatever. But at some fundamental level, you hit the age of 18 and you vote in whatever way you see fit. I don't think it can be anything else.
I think we should reduce the age down to 16, because I was quite active when I was young, and I think that you should be able to have a say in your future. You know?
But I suppose the observation I guess I emphasise is that it's interesting that, like, when people are voting for the opposition for what the Liberal government claim to be what they think of superficial reason, then they hammer them. But I'm sure, they don't mind.
Well,
if it's,
forget them.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a young person,
don't listen to
don't listen to anybody who says that you don't have the ability to.
We've got 5 minutes. Something is happening here. I wonder.
No, that's all right. Oh yeah, we've got another thing. Okay, sorry. Sorry. So, John O'Hare, Greens seem to love pirate policy generally because their own tends to be lack of variance. Always happy to take on a good policy no matter where it comes from. Thank you, John. Okay, another statement. Do we have a question there?
Okay, that's from Trudy Talas, I think his name is.
Looking like they get more, but I believe they don't overall. Okay, that's something like if you've got a question in there, please ask. So we've covered climate change a little bit, and we're really running out of time, but we are for climate action. One of the last things I guess I want to talk about, if we don't get a question in that time, is defence, and and how much money we're spending on defence.
I think we want to push it down to 1.5% of GDP, and we want to emphasise a defensive force. I mean, one of the things is if you've got a rifle, either you can sit there and wait for the enemy to come to you, or you can pick it up and run towards the enemy. But different weapons have got different offensive or defensive capabilities. What the Americans want is force projection. We can take this armed force from here to somewhere else. But if you don't have that, then fundamentally you've got a defensive force. And we believe in emphasising an actual defence force that is a defence force, like the name says.
Yeah. I mean, we've been active in with the ANZUS Treaty and everything in several wars overseas and several police actions. I think it's important that we have a defensive force in Australia and that we do consider the rising non-democratic countries that are trying to do a bit of a land grab, and we need to consider our safety. But here's the thing, it really needs to be balanced with education and health in the country. So we want a country that's worth fighting for, essentially. And at the moment, I don't think we're getting that. Would I guess you've got to ask yourself the question: would you defend Australia? And there's of course there's plenty of people who would put up their hand and say, yes, I would defend Australia if we were attacked. And I think most people would sort of have that sentiment. But we really need to...
There's a big difference between an enemy at our shoreline and us actually getting in boats and going somewhere else and attacking other people elsewhere.
And I mean, that's been
a big difference.
We have a big history of doing that, getting involved in other wars and other conflicts. And sometimes we really haven't had a choice, and sometimes we haven't. I think we really need to be aware of those choices. One in particular, obviously, is the Iraq War and the false premise on which we went to war. So I guess we're going to
well, if I can make one comment there, I was talking about hypocrisy of foreign policy. I do remember a cute thing from way back when Howard was criticising Saddam for not letting the UN weapons inspectors into his palaces, and I remember someone saying, I wonder why Saddam doesn't want the UN checking out his palaces. Maybe for the same reason as Howard doesn't want them checking out his refugee camps.
That's a very good point. I just noticed that somebody from one of my former colleagues has come on board. Hello, Charmaine, a very hard-working teacher there from the Teachers Union. She's an amazing person. She inspired me to do a lot of work with my women's group, and just an amazing person who has inspired me. It's really great for you to come on board. Do you have a question, Charmaine, or does anybody have a question as we get into the last 2 minutes?
I suppose we have to say we're going for an hour. I guess we do have other things to do, so we do need to bring things to a close.
There's a couple of things I want to talk about quickly. Just saying, even if we don't get elected, that doesn't mean we stop working. That doesn't mean we stop pushing for the Pirate Party to become a bigger political party and move forward over the next 3 years and leading into the next election. So something that I'm looking at doing is helping create young pirates. You've got your young Greens, you've got your young Labor, you've got those young Liberal guys who run around stealing people's core fruits and things. So we're looking at getting younger people involved in the Pirate Party and teaching them a bit about politics, and I think it's important to have that. And
Well,
as we move into the future, you know, hopefully as we bring the age of voting down.
What also says, regardless of whether we get in, I think that the Pirate Party critique of what is wrong with government in Australia is significant, is powerful, is worthwhile.
And at the forefront.
And at the forefront. And okay, I'm in the Pirate Party, and the old archetypal expression is, well, I would say that, wouldn't I? Well, I guess I would, wouldn't I? But you know, basically, whether that resonates or not with you or not is I guess up to you. But certainly, from where I stand, you know, the Pirate Party is saying some important and significant things, and I think what we're doing is worthwhile and important.
Roger Watling wants us to give him an R.
R.
There you go. We get it a lot.
Okay, Miles has asked.
Serious party.
Miles has asked the question: do we want to go into extended time?
Why are festivals being closed in New South Wales? We've come to a time now. I think we should shut it down.
Okay.
We can answer that in text.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I think that you know, from having worked at state government, I think that you know, it's really just the Liberal Party, you know, flexing its muscles, if I can just say that. Okay, good luck. You have one vote in Queensland already. Thank you so much.
Okay, I will give my perverse summary to that. That there's a whole lot of different business interests in New South Wales, and some of them have the ear of government, and some of them are in a position to flex their muscles. Like, let's just say the privilege of gambling or the casinos or whatever. They obviously have an ear of government, but you know, the generally speaking, the pubs that run venues, generally speaking, don't have the same influence. You know, I guess it's just the way things play out. Maybe I've got to be careful what I say too much there. But anyway,
that's all right. That's all right. Okay, so we want to thank you all so much for joining us. It's been great. It's some amazing questions, and don't forget to vote tomorrow if you haven't already.
Yeah.
And yeah, we really appreciate your support and voting for us. And you know, if we don't get in, we'll be back in 3 years' time.
Yeah,
So,
have a good one. Enjoy your democracy sausage and vote wisely.
hopefully there are. I've heard that there are limited democracy sausages out there.
Okay.
So make sure you know that they've got sausages available.
Okay.
Take care, all. Bye.
Bye.